Matt Armstrong is a specialist in repairing European cars, but this time, we're watching him take on something different, a super Nissan. He thought this repair would be an easy one, so he challenged himself even more by deciding he had to rebuild it in just 24 hours. After finishing, he planned to tune and play around with the car to reach an incredibly fast quarter-mile time. But, as usual, things didn't go quite as smoothly as planned. Let's watch as Matt works on restoring a 2013 Nissan GT-R R35. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed here on Twin Power. Matt received the car. As always, he bought it from an auction. It's an older version of the GT-R design, and he purchased it for $45,000. From the exterior, it was clear the driver's door had taken a big hit from an accident. The first issue he noticed was with the brakes. Something wasn't right with them. He started working, and the car seemed fine at first glance. But he was worried about the transmission. It would go into first gear, but it wouldn't shift into second or any higher gear. Even the manual shifting wasn't working properly. He decided to leave the car parked overnight and return in the morning to check again. When he reconnected the battery the next day and started it, a transmission warning light appeared on the dashboard. He unloaded the car from the trailer, and although he could get it into reverse, the transmission was still acting up, shifting unpredictably, and he couldn't pinpoint the issue. So, he decided to take it for a test drive to see if he could diagnose it by feel. There was noticeable shaking and vibration. After about 15 minutes of driving, he still couldn't figure out what the exact problem was. Back at the garage, the first thing he noticed on the dashboard was an electrical fault warning. So he installed a new battery to make sure the issue wasn't related to weak voltage. The next step was to clear all the error codes stored in the ECU. The new battery cost about $80. He connected the positive and negative cables, then hooked up the diagnostic scanner. The first error code that popped up indicated a problem with the brakes and the ABS system. Another code pointed to solenoid valves inside the transmission. There was also a cluster fault, likely caused by the previous battery issue, which might already be fixed, but the code was still stored. He cleared all the codes and waited a moment. Luckily, no new codes reappeared. Now came the crucial moment, starting the car again to see if the same issues returned. The engine started up perfectly. No strange noises, no transmission faults. That was a huge relief because replacing a GT-R transmission could cost up to $10,000. A few faults were still present, though, related to traction control and the ESP system. But nothing serious yet. After that first reset, Matt decided to test drive the car again. He shifted through all gears in manual mode, and everything worked smoothly this time. The car drove calmly, with no vibration or hesitation. He spent about an hour doing this initial inspection. Then, he lifted the car up on the hoist to check underneath. There was a small oil leak coming from the rear of the transmission housing. The exhaust system looked old and had rust on it. Even the brake calipers and some suspension parts were showing age. The first thing he did was remove the underbody protection panels under the transmission to look for the source of the leak. He found it. It was coming from the position switch, which reads the gear selector position. He decided to replace it with a new one, immediately ordering the part. Next, he moved on to the brake issue. He removed the front wheel, which clearly hadn't been taken care of. The condition was poor, and the wheel itself wasn't properly aligned to the rim. He focused on the brake system, noticing that when he pressed the brake pedal, it was slow to return. Not because of the large calipers, but possibly due to air in the hydraulic system. To fix this, he completely drained the old brake fluid, refilled it with new fluid, and bled the air out of all 4 brake lines. Matt handled the reservoir from above, while his dad worked underneath, bleeding each wheel to make sure every bit of air was removed. After the full bleeding process, they tested the pedal pressure. Fortunately, it worked perfectly, firm and responsive. However, some warning lights still appeared on the dashboard, specifically for ABS and traction control. He decided to test drive again, but this time with the diagnostic tool connected to monitor the ABS and traction sensors in real time. His first thought was that the issue might be a faulty relay, but after checking, the relay had proper power and was functioning correctly. Through the scan tool, he found that the fault code was related to the ABS oil pump. It needed calibration using a special tool that only Nissan dealerships typically have. That calibration process would cost around $200. But Matt decided not to go through the dealership route for now, since it would take too long and his 24-hour rebuild challenge was still ongoing. He suspected that a previous owner might have already tried to reprogram the ABS pump and failed, leaving it in this condition. The issue might have started when the battery had been completely drained. For now, he decided to postpone the ABS calibration until the very end of the rebuild. In general, though, everything else on the car was working fine, which meant it was time to start the bodywork. Now that the car was mechanically sound, Matt could finally start on the bodywork, mainly the big dents and damaged panels on the driver's side and rear quarter panel. The driver's door was made of aluminum, and finding a brand new replacement wasn't too expensive, around $450. Matt decided to buy a used door in the good condition instead of a new one to save time and money. He and his friend began by removing all the interior trim from the damaged door, the door panel, plastic covers, window glass, and handle assembly. Then he turned his attention to the large dent on the rear quarter panel, trying to figure out the best way to repair it. It quickly became clear that the only real solution was to replace that entire rear quarter section. The problem was that it would take a long time because all those pieces were welded together, even along the sides of the rear windows. Every section was held in place with spot welds. So Matt began by removing the side and rear windows to expose the weld points. Meanwhile, they kept working on stripping down the old door's interior. Luckily, the replacement door he bought was the exact same color as the car. A rare bit of good fortune. It even came with the glass, handle, and electrical connections already installed. Next, Matt moved to the rear of the car, checking the bolts underneath the side skirt area. Unfortunately, all of them were rusted solid. With his dad's help, they slowly managed to loosen and remove them. When they finally took off the side skirt, a thick layer of dirt and dust fell out. Clearly, the previous owner hadn't been concerned about keeping the car clean. Then Matt started unbolting the door latch, trunk lock sensor, and other parts around the rear section. He removed the trunk struts and then the bolts holding the trunk lid. With the trunk lid removed, he could see the rear glass and the damaged quarter panel more clearly. All the spot welds were now visible, ready to be drilled out. He grabbed a drill and started removing the outer layer of the sheet metal by carefully drilling around each weld point. It's a slow and delicate process. Every single weld had to be drilled individually so the metal wouldn't warp or tear. Then, he realized he needed to remove the rear bumper to reach the remaining welds on the right side. He took out the rear tail lights and carefully detached the bumper, pulling it out completely. Time was flying, and drilling out all those welds was taking far longer than expected. After removing every spot weld, he used a chisel and hammer to gently separate the damaged outer panel from the car's frame. At this point, there were 17 hours left in his 24-hour rebuild challenge. He had to move quickly. The next step was to lift the car higher on the hoist to finish removing the rear bumper and tail lights. He removed the rear wheels, along with the plastic fender liners inside the wheel arches. Once those were off, he could see how much dirt and rust had collected over the years. Underneath, though, the structure looked surprisingly solid. The exhaust system was still the original factory setup, just a bit rusty. He went back to removing the welds around the wheel arch curve that connected the outer sheet metal to the wheel housing. He worked slowly and carefully, making sure not to damage anything on the body. The goal was to avoid having to use heavy welding or patch repairs later. While all this was happening, the replacement rear quarter panel arrived. Matt decided that he would only use the outer skin from the replacement part and not cut too deep into the structure where the taillights mount, to avoid disturbing the main chassis frame. He removed the damaged section completely, but before pulling it out, he noticed that part of the roof panel overlapped the rear quarter, so he had to carefully pry it loose without bending or scratching the roof. To get the damaged panel out, they created a small opening near the roof edge to allow the old piece to slide out from underneath. Once that was done, he used a metal saw to cut through the last connections and finally pulled the crushed section off. Success! The damaged rear quarter was gone. The good news was that the chassis underneath was 100% straight. No frame damage at all. That was a huge relief. Before installing the new piece, everything had to be cleaned thoroughly, removing old glue, rust, and dust to prepare for welding. Then came the tricky part, figuring out exactly how to fit the new panel so that the lines matched perfectly with the door, trunk, and roof. The goal was to make sure no panel gaps looked off or uneven. Time was still ticking fast, so Matt started working on reshaping the wheel arch area, heating and hammering it gently back into its original shape. Then he used a grinding tool to smooth out all the surfaces where the welds had been drilled. After cleaning and flattening everything, it was time to test fit the new panel. He lowered the car to install the new driver's door and trunk lid first, using them as alignment references. If the gaps around those parts were correct, he could position the new quarter panel precisely. When everything lined up, door, trunk, and body lines all flowing together, it looked factory perfect. Matt marked all the new welding points with a marker, drilled fresh holes for spot welds, then removed the panel again to prepare for final installation. He sprayed primer and anti-rust coating on all contact areas, especially near the fuel tank and rear wheel well, since welding would generate a lot of heat in those zones. He also placed protective tape around the fuel tank to avoid any risk. Then he applied another layer of anti-corrosion sealant to the inner surface of the new panel. Once it dried, he positioned the new panel and fastened it in place with screws around the door frame to hold it securely. Now came the welding process. His welding setup was different from what's used in factories, where robotic machines perform uniform welds. But his manual technique worked just as effectively for this kind of repair. He carefully welded along every drilled point until the new panel was solidly in place. Next, he temporarily installed the rear glass to check for any misalignments or gaps. Everything looked great. The fit was perfect. Then came the finishing touches. He sanded down all the welded joints to make the surface smooth, applied sealer with a brush behind the taillight housings, and even added extra sealer compared to what comes from the factory, just for better protection. After that, he began reassembling everything: the trunk lid, side skirts, and finally the rear bumper with the taillights. All the lines matched beautifully, no uneven gaps or crooked edges anywhere. While Matt was finishing the exterior, his father worked on reinstalling the interior trim. They reconnected the battery to test all the electronics: the window switches, side lights, speaker, and mirror controls on the new door. Everything worked perfectly. By this time, there was only 1 hour left in his 24-hour challenge. Matt had saved that hour for one last touch: replacing the wheels. As always, he picked a set of stylish aftermarket rims that transformed the car's look completely. Once installed, the GT-R looked stunning, even better than before the crash. The total cost of the rebuild came to around $47,000. Honestly, not bad, considering what he ended up with. The repair might have looked like a huge job, but for Matt Armstrong, it was almost child's play compared to some of the wrecked supercars he's rebuilt before. Still, he wasn't done yet. He wanted to paint the car himself and, of course, upgrade the engine for more power. After completing the bodywork, Matt decided it was time to move on to the heart of the GT-R, the engine. He wanted to increase the power output and make the car perform like a true monster on the road. His plan was simple but ambitious: completely remove the engine, inspect it, clean everything, replace key components, and then upgrade the turbos and cooling system to handle more boost. To start, he parked the GT-R in the middle of his workshop and began disconnecting everything that linked the engine to the chassis. He first disconnected the battery terminals again to prevent any short circuits while working. Then he removed the engine cover and started unbolting the air intake system and intercooler piping. The GT-R's twin-turbo V6 is a tight fit inside the engine bay, which meant he had to carefully label and photograph every wire, pipe, and connector before removing them. Next, he drained all the fluids: engine oil, coolant, and transmission fluid, making sure not to spill any on the floor. Then he removed the radiator and intercooler assembly from the front. Once everything up top was disconnected, he raised the car on the hoist to access the undercarriage. He removed the exhaust system, starting with the downpipes connected to the turbos, then the midsection, and finally the muffler. He also unbolted the drive shaft and axles, which link the engine and transmission to the rear differential. Now, the engine and transmission were free from below. The next step was to remove them as one complete unit. With his dad helping, they placed the engine support frame underneath, unbolted the subframe mounts, and then slowly lowered the car so the engine sat safely on the support. Once it was resting firmly, they raised the chassis away from the engine, leaving it completely detached. This method was faster and safer for a GT-R since the engine sits very low in the bay. Once the engine was out, Matt took a good look at it. It wasn't in bad shape, but after years of use, it was clear that it needed some serious cleaning. They used degreaser and high-pressure air to clean all the oil residue off the block and the twin turbochargers. While inspecting, he noticed minor oil seepage around the valve covers, so he decided to replace all the gaskets and seals while the engine was already out. He also took the opportunity to upgrade the turbos. The factory GT-R turbos are impressive, but Matt had a pair of larger aftermarket turbochargers ready, capable of producing far more boost and pushing the car well beyond its stock power levels. The goal was to hit around 800 horsepower, which would make this GT-R a real rocket. He began disassembling the stock turbo setup, removing the oil lines, coolant lines, and manifolds, and replaced them with the new units. He also swapped out the fuel injectors for larger high-flow ones and installed a performance fuel pump to support the higher fuel demand. While he was at it, he decided to upgrade the intercooler system too. The new setup had larger cores for better cooling efficiency, ensuring the air going into the engine stayed cool, even at high boost pressures. After all the new components were fitted, Matt checked each connection carefully. Every hose clamp, every bolt, nothing was left loose. He even cleaned and repainted some of the engine covers to make them look brand new, matching the rest of the car's fresh exterior. Once everything was ready, it was time to reinstall the engine. He lowered the car back down over the engine assembly, aligning all the mounts and brackets. With his dad's help, they bolted everything in place: the subframe, drive shaft, suspension arms, and axles. Then, one by one, Matt reconnected all the wiring harnesses and cooling lines. After hours of work, the engine was finally back inside the car, sitting perfectly in its place. Before starting it, he filled up all the new fluids: fresh engine oil, coolant, transmission fluid, and brake fluid. He double-checked all connections and made sure no tools were left inside the bay. Now came the big moment, starting the upgraded engine for the first time. Matt connected the battery, turned the key, and the GT-R roared to life instantly. The engine idled smoothly, with a deep, aggressive tone coming from the new exhaust system. He let it run for several minutes while monitoring the oil pressure, coolant temperature, and boost levels using the diagnostic tablet. Everything looked perfect. No leaks, no strange noises. He gave it a few gentle revs, and the twin turbos spooled up beautifully, producing that signature GT-R whistle. The sound was insane, deep, sharp, and powerful. After letting the engine warm up completely, he shut it off and checked all the fluid levels one more time. Everything was in perfect condition. Next up was the tuning stage. Matt connected his laptop to the ECU using a special tuning cable and opened up the GT-R's engine management software. He uploaded a custom tune designed specifically for the upgraded turbos and fuel system. This new map increased the boost pressure, adjusted the ignition timing, and fine-tuned the fuel ratios to get maximum performance while keeping the engine safe. The upload took about 10 minutes. Once it was complete, he restarted the car, and you could immediately tell the difference. The throttle response was sharper, and the engine sounded even more alive. Now it was time for the test drive, the part Matt always enjoyed the most.